Hello and welcome to Lorehammer, a 40K podcast. Hey, I'm your host, Mark, here to tell you a story of rebellion and betrayal and probably heresy at some point, too. Joining me, we got Christian. Welcome.
Hey, how's it going? Love being here every time.
Oh, it's going so every time, all the time. Never once have you missed a time.
No.
Never once have.
I've never been on an episode that I didn't intend to be on. So.
Okay. We also got James. For all your complaint fielding needs.
Yeah, that's right. Welcome.
Today, we got a fun episode. We're doing some Severan Dominate. And for anyone who doesn't really know what that is, well, that's why we're doing an episode. So hold your fucking horses. We got some housekeeping first. We're doing Lorehammer twice a week. I don't know if you guys knew this, but I made 2 friends beyond you two. So I'm back up to kind of like, wow, I have a couple friends to speak of. One hand worth almost. We were able to kind of make 2 episodes of Lorehammer every week. So kind of look forward to an episode coming out on Mondays and Wednesdays is kind of the plan at this current kind of get-go. The reason we're able to do this is, did you guys know that we're in the top 1% of podcasts in the world?
We're coming for you, Joe Rogan.
Well, like physically, like
threats like that. But...
no, dude. Don't make threats you can't back up.
We're hoping he invites us on his show.
Yeah, and there are a couple shows I want to get on. Like, top 1% of podcasts in the world. So what this kind of allows us to do is twofold. Maybe somebody will take into account that and donate to our Patreon, and like even if only 1% of our 1% of the world podcasts donate, we're a lot better off. We can produce more content and stuff. So as the show kind of gets back to its rightful place as number 1, more people join the Patreon. So that's very nice. The other reason we're able to do this is through some ad revenue deals. Once upon a time, we had some Spotify money, and I don't want to be Spotify exclusive again. So I've worked around some other ways to make some money, but that comes with some ads. So you just skip past them, or, you join the Patreon, you get an ad-free version of the live show. So yeah, that's pretty sweet. Twice a week episodes.
Yeah, join in on the Patreon and you can show up for those. We do a calling guest. We engage with the chat. Everyone's complimenting on how hot I am. I appreciate it. Everyone in the chat saying that. It's super.
Everyone.
It's an ego boost. I appreciate it.
Over and over.
Yeah, it's actually I'm blushing a little bit. So if you could stop, that'd be great. But if you can also be one of the calling guests, so you can be a part. You could be one of those people that is in the top 1% of podcasts. You can speak your mind on the 40K subject. So bring it on.
Yeah, no, I love the call-in. It's been super cool.
Are you doing call-ins on both episodes, Mark?
Yeah. We live stream both episodes. So we live stream one episode on Wednesday night and then Friday night. So
more bang for your buck.
Pretty cool time to be a Lorehammer fan.
You can join in on both episodes.
You could be.
Or if this night doesn't work for you, try the other night, and at some point you'll get a hold of Mark.
That's right.
Well, no,
just
the
like
other
I've
show
been calling you all day and you don't pick up.
No, the other show is hosted by Trevor Buzak and Gerald and Nick. So, I wasn't invited on that second part.
Oh.
I just hired out to the best of the best.
Do you pay yourself now? Or did you open a separate bank account for Trevor?
For TV.
No, he's his own entity. I don't have to do that. He's a real person and he's out there. So doing that, final thing before I get into the show here, we do have Discord as well, and that's been kind of very cool. Once upon a time, as the show grows back to where it's rightfully supposed to be, we get more money. So I'm going to be able to invest some more money into Discord events and competitions like we used to have, maybe some cash prizes. Maybe one of the prizes is I fly you down to Paradise Reef to play Airbnb with me for the weekend. Hard to say, but probably is going to happen. So get involved.
A live 40K
with
game?
the Discord. Yeah. On the beach shirtless with me.
You have to be shirtless.
Whatever they want. Even if they want to count with me. Like, I'll do whatever.
Rogue Trader, original.
Yeah.
Yes, hell yes. Lots of fun things happen on the Discord. The other big thing is the contest we're doing right now. The event is gangs versus Arbites. If you listen to the last episode, we kind of went on Hive Cities and Highborns rant, and that spawned, let's talk about criminal organizations and the ones that deal with them. So very much like our Warlords of Terra thing, go write some lore, send it in, and we're going to battle off each other, gang versus our police officers, and see who kind of comes out on top. So get involved on the Discord. It's a lot of fun.
Sweet.
Let's
Jump
let's
into it. Let's get ready to rumble.
yeah, man. So we're talking about the Severan Dominant, and this episode is called "A Rebellion Begins." The quick little short and dirty about these guys is this is one of those empires that didn't quite go to chaos, but definitely is not a fan of the current state of the Imperium, and they're trying to make out their own meager place in the universe. The source material from this comes from, in my mind, one of the coolest spots of all of 40k lore, and it's from Fantasy Flight Games. They came out with a bunch of RPGs. I'm sure you guys have heard me talk about it before, and they were so well thought out, because when you're doing an RPG, you really got to start thinking about the backstory a lot more.
The details,
micro details. How does the economy actually work, and all those, the shipping lanes, all these kind of cool micro details. So these guys, the Severan Dominant, came out of the Only War RPG, and they're featured in like the main one and a couple source books, and like lots of information on them, and like lots of cool micro details.
Yeah, and it's cool too because people who aren't like super into Warhammer, like maybe they only do the tabletop or only do the video games, they might never have heard of the Severan Dominant. So this episode is definitely worth it, and they're worth everyone knowing about.
Yeah, like I'm not sure always about what would be considered canon. Like, is only GW stuff canon? Would these guys be considered canon? Like, is Space Marine 2 considered canon? You can kind of get lost in the weeds of some of it, but man, Fantasy Flight Games knocked it out of the park. I like these guys. I consider them canon. They stick true to what 40k is, man. They're fun.
Yeah,
I got a quote here for the Duke Severus XIII to the citizens of Lucas, and this will set kind of the stage of this episode. The High Lords of Terra would bleed us dry for their purposes, at the same time that they refuse to help defend us against Xenos. The time has come to withhold our tithe so that we may use it in our own defense. So very kind of typical. Like, they don't like the way they're being treated. They're giving more than they're getting. And that's kind of the seeds of rebellion right there. The Severan Dominate is a rebellious confederation of worlds scattered across the cold void of the periphery subsector within the Calexis sector of the Segmentum Obscurus. Under the Iron Will leadership of Duke Severus XIII of Kolth, these worlds have cast off the shackles of the Imperium of Man, defiantly succeeding in plunging the region into a brutal war for control. The periphery now bleeds as three fractions vie for the supremacy: the Severan Dominant, the Imperium, and the savage orcs of the Wog Grimtooth, each clawing for dominance in what could be known as the Spineward Front. Duke Severus I, the progenitor of his line, was once a hero of the Avenging Crusade, a campaign that forged the Calexis sector in the name of the Emperor. Severus was a brilliant rogue trader, a master of strategy whose blade cut deep into the heart of the Calexis expanse. Without his cunning, the Imperium's conquest might have dragged on for centuries. It is whispered among certain scholars that even the vaunted Saint Drasus owed much of his success to Severus's victories. The Calexis sector there is so much happening in this region. I think Fantasy Flight Games came up with this specific sector. We talked about them, I think, even on our last episode together a little bit about like the Calexis sector, and kind of some of these planets are making reappearances. There's just so much information and interlocking stories and stuff of this sector.
Yeah, I think it's kind of like the setting where they do most of their RPG work. So that's why they keep going back to it, right? It's like, this is where all this stuff is going on. And why there's so much.
This is what they can affect and control and not have to worry about. Now, what's Reboot Gilliman up to? Well, he's not in this sector.
Right, exactly. If they tread too far into like other storylines, and they could mess up something that maybe a Black Library author might be working on and stuff like that. So they kind of have like creative freedom over this region. Have
we talked about the Angevin Crusade before? Because I brought up recently with someone I heard about, and I'm just trying to remember what to place it. Like, what was the Angevin Crusade? Do either of you remember that right off?
Not off the top.
No. I feel like it was pretty recent though. In Spain with the Spineward Front, we talked about that too, and I think those two are. Yeah, what was it? Maybe the live chat remember, because it was one of our most recent episodes.
We'll have to do an Angevin Crusade episode then.
yeah, exactly. Yet Severus' fall became from within. Consumed by greed, he forsook the crusade and lingered to amass personal power, allowing Drasus to eclipse him. The Severus bloodline from that moment became one of treachery and hate, a family whose resentment of the Imperium simmered across generations. Their ambitions remained unfulfilled, their hopes for glory crushed as they slowly withered into obscurity, their influence waning until the arrival of Duke Severus XIII.
Yeah. So
by 799...
What happened to the first 12?
Yeah, so it was like a noble house that helped, because you got to always keep in mind how big the time scales are 40K. So from the 1st to the 13th, you're assuming that's 13 generations worth of people. And
not
it's
necessarily.
Well, yeah, true, not necessarily.
Severus could have named one of his children.
At a minimum,
Dave.
It would have been 13.
Yes. Or
so
maybe all the brothers were named Severus too.
He's just the 13th brother in line.
Yeah.
It's really one generation removed.
Yeah, they just keep they all were born in a row, and they named them all Severus. And then when one died, he was like 80, and then the next one when he died, or 80, he died. And so there were 13, but they're only really 13 years apart.
Sure, okay.
It could be
in James's world, okay. But
he's got that ovulation strip just going. He knows when to do it. He's ready. He's pumping up 14 next year.
Yeah. No, but in reality, this is the decline of the house, right? Like generation after generation, they would have been great had their ancestor actually kept going and not become obsessed with himself and obsessed with, his own personal glory. And then they get eclipsed by the saint. And then by the time of the 13th is when he kind of makes a comeback. But all that time, your family's kind of like, oh, we could have been great. Our great-great-grandfather conquered most of this region, and now look at us like we're nothing, right? So that's what builds this kind of resentment. Yeah.
You know what, though? 7 or 13 generations is pretty good. Normally wealth and prestige and stuff fades after 3. So to be able to hold it on for that long, that's not too bad.
But that's it, though. They didn't. They lost a lot of it. They still probably have some pull, but nothing like the founder of the sector, right?
Yeah.
And that, I think, is also a great way to launch a setting like this, is to have just that, a rich personality like that, where, its bitterness has consumed someone who's lost things, but can't be ambitious in a positive way of we're going to reclaim it in a positive way. It's motivated by bitterness and resentment. That's such a rich well for character to be driven from. I think that's awesome.
Yeah, man. We got a comment. Or they just skip numbers because they can't count. So maybe the education system is lacking in this sector.
Remember those Habsburgs? Those Habsburgs looked a little messed up by this point. So maybe they are a little deranged. I'm the 13th. Yes, you are. Of course, yes. My Duke.
My Duke. My Duke. By 799 M41, the last scion of the bitter house rose to power, named the Lord of the Periphery by Lord Sector Marius Hax. The decision Hax made under duress, knowing full well the danger it posed. Severus XIII had carved out a web of allies, including key members of the Adeptus Arbites. These connections allow him to silence rivals, mask his sins, and create an illusion of untarnished loyalty. But whispers of his darker dealings persisted. Rumors of falsified records, planted evidence, and political assassinations, crimes buried deep beneath the weight of his influence. It's crazy that early on, he was able to kind of influence the Adeptus Arbites in this way. We talked about this on the Hive Cities episode just last week about, what are the Adeptus Astartes really monitoring? And it's kind of, are you maintaining your tithes and are you falling to chaos? They're not monitoring petty crime. They're monitoring crimes against the Imperium. And you think starting your own empire would kind of fall under that category, but somehow they snuck it in past them.
Well, that's the thing is he's not quite in the empire building stage yet. This is his influence gaining stage, right? So
yeah,
it's not like you come out and just say I'm taking over, right? Obviously they would execute him as a traitor. But, he pays him off. Yeah. He's just ignore this or ignore that. And it's a creeping of mini sins that eventually leads to, it's like Breaking Bad, right?
Okay, so maybe this is worth pulling out a few threads here. Because my understanding is the Arbites are police force. That's the way they're usually represented. I'm thinking to when I was reading the Eisenhorn series, there's a lot of interaction with Arbites in that. They are acting kind of like a police force in that series. oh, there was a robbery in this place. The Arbites are there to check it out. Oh, there was a murder. The Arbites are running that down. Maybe there's variation from planet to planet, but they do seem to act as a police force. And you're right, they might have a higher priority for, we care more about tithe and chaos because those are obviously bigger problems. But they do seem to, at least in some cases, act as a police force. Do they not?
Yeah, for sure. And like you can imagine that, like, okay, so what's the best way to know if chaos taint is spreading? Well, you got to get a hold of some criminals. So you got to bust some skulls. You got to find some criminals, see if what they're doing is out of like desperation or chaos taint. And also, like, yeah, if there isn't one huge rebellion going on that you have to kind of stifle, like, you know, these people wanted to join the cops to crush skulls, you know, so they're going to go do that anyways, just for the heck of it, even though it might not be their jurisdiction.
Yeah. And like the Arbites, think of them more like federal police, like the FBI. Like the FBI doesn't care about like petty crimes or crimes that's like a one-off, right? Like, or a one-off murder, right? But if that murder is linked to, say, like a cartel or something bigger, then they'll get involved. Right?
That makes sense, because I'm thinking, I forget which one of the Eisenhorn books it is. I think it might have been the second one, but he's on this planet and there is like this murder, but they're like, oh, is this part of something bigger? So it does make sense more as a federal police force. Like, oh, this is tied to maybe some crime syndicate, something that bigger. We're after. Yeah. Okay. That makes sense.
And more against like imperial law, right? Again. And that's why too, you can have all this kind of infighting with noble houses, and they could even kill each other. And it's not like necessarily,
as long as the quotas are met at the end of the day,
they're like,
and chaos isn't the cause of it.
Yeah, exactly. Right.
We got a comment from Sigismund. Isn't the Arbites centered around their own planets? Like whatever planet they're on is the only thing that they're worried about. Yeah, for sure. They have courthouses. They have their own
jurisdictions.
You know, they recruit from the population, and they don't travel around and all that kind of stuff. They're made to monitor planets.
Yeah, but they're part of the larger institution of the Arbites, which is like focused on the entire Imperium. Like every, in theory, maybe not all, but most imperial worlds with a heavy population would have an Arbites presence, right? They're part of the same institution, even though the individuals aren't necessarily being transplanted around the Imperium.
Exactly. Yeah. With his new authority, Severus XIII wasted no time expanding his reach. His dominion grew swiftly, but his greed outpaced his loyalty. Instead of reporting his successes to the Imperium, Severus sought darker alliances. He conspired with the Xenos Tricari, the statistic cabal of the Children of the Thorns, trading human lives for power and security. His world swelled under his command, but the price was steep. Then the storm broke out. The orcs of Wog Grimtooth crashed into the periphery like a green tide of destruction. As Severus scrambled to defend his fragile empire, the Tricari demanded more access, more slaves, more blood. The weight of his betrayals could no longer be hidden. Desperate and cornered, he turned to the Imperium for aid, but it was too late. His treachery was exposed. Severus had no choice but to act. Before the Imperium could punish him, he severed ties with the Emperor's realm, rallying his forces to stand defiantly against their former masters. Thus, the Severus Dominate was born in fire, its fate bound to the chaos of war on the Spineward front. The die was cast. Severus XIII's rebellion would now determine whether his name would be etched into history as a bold liberator or another tragic fool who defied the Emperor's will. Yeah. It's interesting that he we touch a lot more on the Drakari and his kind of relationship with them. You really don't hear often people making alliances with Drakari. It seems more like you're not a slave, but you're definitely not on the same playing field if you're making a deal with them, you know?
Yeah, or it could almost be like almost like when you make a deal with change, where like you think you have the upper hand, but they're like, okay, you're an idiot, but we're gonna play you, right?
Yeah.
And they are one of the factions that does make sense to like be able to forge an alliance with to some degree, like more so than say Necron or like Tyranids or Orcs, right? Like you have something that they want, and if it's easier for them to not have to risk their own Eldar lives to get slaves, you just set up a trade. And
because as we've discussed before, they're not about conquering empires. They're just here to get whatever they want and go back to their little base.
Yeah. There's a saying in Cormorant that there's actually more humans there than Dark Eldar, but they're all slaves, so they don't really count.
Yeah.
So
they're not voting citizens.
They are not citizens, no.
All right. So yeah, that's a good like general overview, but let's dive into their history a little more in detail. So the tale of House Severan. Nearly 2,000 years ago, in the mid-39th millennium, the Calaxis sector was torn from the clutches of the Xenos-infested Calix expanse in the Segmentum Obscurus. It was a conquest forged in the blood of the countless imperial martyrs who laid down their lives in the fires in the Angevin Crusade. The victory was not the work of one, but of many, the combined might of the Imperium's greatest forces. Asher Militarum regiments marched in relentless tides, pushing back the alien scourge, while the elite warriors of the Adeptus Astartes struck at the heart of the Xenos forces. Overhead, the sky darkened with the fury of the Imperial Navy's fighter wings, while warships raged across the stars like burning beacons of humanity's dominion. On the ground, the godlike war engines of the Adeptus Titanicus strode across battlefields, and the armies of rogue traders driven by ambition fought for a future where they might reign over the worlds they helped conquer. Among these daring rogue traders stood Duke Severus I, a man whose name should be etched in the annals of history for his heroic deeds. I want my name etched in the annals of history.
In the annals.
No, your name is next. Yeah, exactly.
That's where it belongs. He,
In
the
the
bearer
annals of all our listeners, for sure. That's where your name is.
He, the bearer of a warrant of trade issued by the High Lords of Terra, led audacious strikes deep into the Calix expanse, pushing further than any Imperial force dared. His efforts broke the deadlock of countless battles, including the plasma bombardment of the Xenos-spawned seas of Cantus Extremis, opening the Mercurian marches to Imperial conquest. Did we do a Rogue Trader episode ever, Mark?
No.
Okay.
No,
we
we
definitely
need to,
should
though.
do that at some point. But yeah, so just for, again, some context, like rogue traders do have a lot of wealth and power and leeway within the Imperium. And that's like, if someone's already a rogue trader, they're already pretty high status if they have a warrant of trade.
Yeah, like those things are signed by the Emperor himself back in the day, and they go back 10,000 years of dealings. Yeah,
so exactly. So you're already of pretty high, like, nobility within the Imperium. This isn't just some guardsman who worked his way to the top. Like, we're already starting at the top. And then by, like, obviously this crusade is huge. We probably should, if there's enough information on the
like they had like
Angelo
Titans going around there and Astartes Legion
sure
or chapters, like crazy amount of stuff.
I'm pretty sure I have a book in my bookshelf that's about the Angevin Crusade.
All right. Well, you got 2 weeks to read it to write up an
I'll
episode.
get no problem.
But yeah, just again to set the scene of like, okay, we're getting into the sector. This is kind of like new territory that the Imperium's expanding into. All these forces of the Imperium combined are just like smashing through, and then there's Severus I, leading his rogue trader forces to take land and like be a hero. Severus's brilliance was unmatched. His charts uncovered the warp route between Drea and Locanthos, when even the fleet masters of the Imperial Navy were confounded. He even faced a warp spawn monstrosity aboard his flagship, dragging the foul beast into real space and slaying it with his own hand. The crystalline eye of the creature, hewn from its skull by Severus himself, was a trophy worth the ransom of the High Lord. But it was in the periphery subsector where his true glory was earned. Severus fought tooth and nail against the nameless horrors of Xenos empires, battles whose details remain shrouded in secrecy. The archives whisper of events such as the scouring of Cyclopia 9 and the Kulth landings and the War of Ash, where Severus sent 1,000 Xenos ships crashing into the atmosphere of Sisk.
Whew.
Yeah.
Before we carry on, we got a couple questions here still about the rogue traders. Seems like we're scratching somebody's itch out there. So we got from Drop Zone YYC. Are rogue traders also like collectors or strictly like in and out deals?
Whatever they kind of want. That's the whole point.
They can do anything. Like they even have permission to deal with alien species and stuff. And like you might find like Eldar part of this rogue traders retinue. Another fun question or comment is wonder how many signature collectors would pay for that or how much.
Yeah, I have an autographed signature of the Emperor right here, signed last week. Wait, how did you do that?
Do you think he signs it just of the Emperor?
No, they get his like corpse hand and just go like,
it with their it's hand. Like the ink instead of like his blood, like that his warp juices that come out of him, his they make those psych out. That they used to make the psych out grenades. They're like using that as his fucking signature ink. That's gross. Thanks.
That's a powerful document though.
Yeah.
Yeah, we definitely have to do a Rogue Trader episode. That would also lend a lot of context to what we're talking about here. But, yeah. At the Second Battle of Kolth, Severus achieved his greatest triumph. Surrounded by hordes of vile Xenos, he rallied his troops in a desperate last stand. The histories tell of Severus facing a Xenos monstrosity so terrible that it shattered the minds of his champions. Yet he stood firm, delivering the killing blow himself and turning the tide of the campaign. So again, just like all the achievements of Severus I. And any other story, like he would be like a great war hero, right? Like just even single-handedly taking on monsters like warp beasts. Another thing to note too is like rogue traders are wealthy enough to have their own ships, their own armies. Like he has his own forces too, but he himself
and super exotic tech too. Like they're probably
again they can trade with Xenos,
STCs, and
so they're definitely not to be underestimated. This isn't just some guy. Like he's obviously by his like record, he's crazy good. So why then is the name of Duke Severus first forgotten? Why is the legacy buried beneath the ashes of time? The answer lies in humanity's greatest flaw, hubris. Severus believed he had earned a kingdom of his own within the Imperium. His warrant of trade promised him much, and when the High Lords of Terra sent him to the Calyx Expanse, they never expected him to return. His rivals hoped the terrors of the void would consume him, ending his rise to power. So again, that's a cool like insight into the Imperium and how it works and like the backroom politicking of like, it seems like a good thing if I'm like, hey, yeah, here's like a warrant of trade. Here's a new unexplored region of space. Go, carve your name in the stars. Really, we know you're probably going to die out there because it's like no chance of survival. But obviously, Severus is good enough that
he's a beast.
Yeah, he just tanked the whole system.
Soloed it.
Yeah. Yet Severus defied them. He carved out the periphery and claimed it as his personal realm, a dominion exempt from imperial law. But his ambitions were overshadowed by another, Saint Drasus. While Severus sought to consolidate power, Drasus fought on, claiming world after world in the emperor's name. Bitter and broken, Duke Severus turned his back on the crusade, finding solace in the company of the infamous rogue trader Sibylline Harlock. Their conversations are lost to history, but some say Harlock rejected Severus's dreams of empire. In the end, Severus died in obscurity, a man once destined for greatness, reduced to a paranoid recluse. He passed in 417 M39, just weeks before Saint Drasus, his name forgotten, his glory stolen by the hand of fate. So yeah, like while he becomes consumed with like, his own worlds that he's conquered and all these great feats that he's done, he stops conquering in the name of the Imperium, stops taking new worlds, and there's Drasus in the same crusade, like we said, all these different factions are there, still taking world after world and like eclipsing him completely.
Right, so he's a little bit like a Luther to the Lion.
Right, exactly, just like overshadowed and just kind of like left bitter and angry, which seems to like follow down the generation line, right? Again, as we mentioned earlier.
Interesting. Yeah. Well, let's bring out a new detail. A fateful deal. Duke Severus I did not die as the last of his line. Before his passing, he shared his tragic tale with his firstborn son, no doubt casting it as a bitter narrative of envy and betrayal by lesser men, conspiring against one who was their superior. The son, in turn, passed this version of events down to his own heir, and with each retelling, the story was warped. Its truths eroded until only a distorted fragment of the original tale remained. Through the generations, the scions of the House Severus inherited this twisted legacy, and by the time Duke Severus XIII ascended in 779 M41, the tale had become an obsession, fueling his ambition. Unlike his predecessors, Severus XIII was not content to languish in the shadow of the past. Through cunning and unsavory alliances, he clawed his way up the echelons of power within the Calaxis sector, using means yet unknown to most.
Yeah, so just a couple little dates here. When Duke Severus I passed away was 417, and then we jump, or 417 M39, and then we jump all the way to 779 M41. So this is quite a big time of these 13 generations. Like there must have even been some like guys that lived for a couple hundred years before they finally died and passed it on to their next son or whatever.
Which isn't crazy. Like there are humans in the Imperium that can live hundreds of years, but also James could be right too about like they didn't necessarily name all their heirs Severus, so maybe Severan the 13th wasn't necessarily the 13th generation. I'm just guessing if they followed that lineage in line. But one could have named his heir Dave, and then Dave named Severus II, right?
But that's like quite a big period we're dealing with. That it's at this glorious start and then that slow decline.
In 799 M41, he achieved what he had been the goal of his lineage for centuries. Severus XIII was appointed Lord Subsector, ruling over the very region his ancestor had fought to claim, the periphery. However, his rise to power did not come without dark compromises. To gain the influence needed to secure his position, Severus XIII entered into a dangerous pact with the Drukhari cabal known as the Children of Thorns, a rogue faction of Dark Eldar exiled from the twisted city of Gomorrah. This cabal comprised of the dregs of Drukhari society, escaped slaves, disgraced nobles, and defeated champions, sought to reclaim their status and power through the labyrinthine webway.
I was kind of just thinking, like, yeah, what's the bond there? Like, how did they make this deal? Why do they even think about that? But like the cabal of the Children of the Thorns, it's like, yeah, they are also in this kind of similar situation where they feel like they're slaves and they escaped, or they're like disgraced nobles. Yeah, you know, very kind of similar backstory with these two that they could probably bond over, and maybe even just feel like they can feel comfortable with that Xenos.
Yeah. Well, it also might just be like, to use a historical reference, the Dane Geld. When the Danes come over to England to do their Viking things, they would ask for money, and so like you'd say, oh, we'll go away if you give us a whole big ton of money. And so this might have been the same thing where there was just a raiding party and they said, hey, we'll go away if you give us all these slaves for free, and then you don't have to fight us. Yeah. And so then it builds and builds and builds, because that's the same thing that happened with the Dane Geld. Is every time they'd come, they'd get asked for more money, and then they bring that money back to Denmark, and then their buddies would be like, hey, how'd you get all that money?
We're gonna go get some money.
Yeah, and then you just it's like a spiraling problem of you keep asking for money, or you keep giving pirates money, and then they keep
getting
asking
more
for money.
And I guess with just brain fart, Christian, throw it to you. I guess I lost it.
Yeah, no, the other thing is that if this cabal is cut off from Cormorant, their access to slaves too is limited, right? The resources of Cormorant are limited, so maybe to them it's beneficial to like, okay, like better to get paid off than have to fight for our slaves all the time, because they are, as far as cabals go, probably pretty weak.
Yeah, like that slave deal goes both ways. It's like, okay, so if we get into war, we both lose people. You know, the Severan Dominate loses 1,000. Otherwise, you just want us to give us 250. So it's like, that's deal with the devil. But it's better than losing 1,000, you know?
Yeah, exactly.
And like you said, just that snowball.
All right. So in exchange for their alliance, the Children of Thorns were granted free reign over the periphery, conducting real space raids with little opposition. Thousands of men, women, and children were ripped from their worlds, dragged screaming into the Dark City to fuel the unending torment of the Drukhari. Some suspected that their involvement in the wars of the Spineward Front went beyond more slave raids, hinting at far more sinister agenda. Severus XIII, consumed by ambition and emboldened by his dark alliances, sought to achieve what his forebear could not, to claim the periphery as his own. Yet he knew that to openly secede from the Imperium would bring the wrath of the loyalist planetary governors and the full might of the Imperium down on him. Instead, he chose a subtler path. His agents scoured the dark reaches of the Spineward periphery, seeking any allies, no matter how vile, who could help him secure his power. Thus he formed the Unholy Pact.
So another thing to keep in mind is that, like, because Severus's line or whatever, like, again, imperial politics, you're like a petty lord amongst a pyramid of lords that goes all the way to Terra, right? So just because you are even a planetary governor or a regional governor, you have someone above you that you kind of report to. So even if you control a whole planet, it's pretty risky to be like, oh yeah, we're going to secede from the Imperium just off the bat, even if you have a whole planet's resources at your disposal, because your lord above you is just going to be like, okay, we're just going to invade you with everything we have from multiple planets, right? Or we'll call in Astartes or whatever, right? Obviously he's still kind of like too weak to do what he wants to do, but
or just even other things, other resources that are guaranteed loyal to the Imperium are going to be against you.
Yeah.
Like if there's an Inquisition anywhere nearby, or if there's assassins nearby, like all the things that wouldn't join you. Like, sure, you can get some guard regiments to follow you, but you're not getting, I don't know,
Astartes.
That's all going to be coming against you now.
Yeah.
And you do put a target on your back from things like assassins, right? Because assassins are devoted to the Imperium. And if they hear, oh, a planetary governor's gone rogue, you are now a target that they're going to go after.
Yeah.
Because they kill
that's
you, maybe the
prime
rebellion's
target.
open.
Yeah.
All right. Offering entire frontier worlds to the Drukhari in exchange for their ruthless assistance. When their raids began, Severus ensured that the subsector's military reserves were always too far away to respond in time. Xenos slave ships, bloated with human cargo, ferried hundreds of thousands of souls to their doom in Comora's nightmarish pits, while Severus's court grew ever darker, filled with veiled courtiers and cold-eyed assassins. For a decade, Severus XIII and his Drukhari allies worked in the shadows, severing the ties between the periphery and the greater Calexis sector one by one. Slowly, the subsector was transformed into Severus's personal domain. Though the worlds closest to the Malfin subsector were kept in a facade of normalcy to avoid suspicion. So yeah, he's like throwing out like, oh, like it's totally fine here in this sector. So when anyone comes in for like an inspection, it's like, yeah, it looks good here. Yet, spinward of them, Severus XIII ruled unchallenged, fulfilling the long-held dream of his bloodline. At last, he had forged an independent stellar empire, an empire built on blood, treachery, and the suffering of countless souls.
So here's an interesting thought to kind of trace out. So, you know, dealing with the Dark Eldar opens up a lot of Dark Eldar tech, including like maybe homunculus tech. And I wonder, like, could you bring a human back from the dead the same way the Dark Eldar kind of trap their soul and then they can grow a clone body and put their soul in it? Are they kind of capable of doing that because they're automatically like highly psychic kind of creatures, but they're not really psychic creatures, Dark Eldar, at all, actually? Like,
yeah, I don't know. I've never thought of it, actually. But I mean,
I could just
I've never
imagine
seen
him
it.
weaving like what the Dark Eldar, like waving immortality in front of Severus's face, you know, and like, give me more souls and you too can be immortal. And like, you know, how many assassination plots maybe even happened, but then basically just got regrown and put back in a different body. That's definitely not canon. I'm interpreting that, but
I think it's a cool potential subplot, but I think you're kind of just inventing it out of
no, that has nothing to do with anything for sure.
But it could be interesting. I don't know. I don't know. Maybe humans aren't psychically, like, unless they are a psyker, maybe they're not strong enough or their soul isn't bright enough to be stored in a gem, but maybe it is. I honestly have no idea. I've never entertained such a vile heretical thought.
Come on, let the Dark Eldar experiment on your body.
Wait a second. I played Oblivion. And you can put people's souls in gems.
Soul gems.
Mm-hmm. And then you can put those gems into swords, and then your swords shoot lightning.
It's all coming together.
It's canon. It's all canon.
So up next, you know, we have the Empire slowly kind of turning dark, and, you know, lots of dark deals and treachery are really solidifying themselves in this empire now. And then the Green Tide arrives. None can say what the fate might have been befallen Severus' fledgling empire had the events continued unchallenged. Perhaps in his growing arrogance, he would have dared to openly declare succession from the Imperium. Or perhaps his treacherous Xenos allies would have turned on him, sensing weakness in his ambitions. But it was not betrayal from within the sealed Severus's doom. It was another Xenos threat entirely, the Orcs. Led by a savage warlord Gensgig Grimstooth, who styled himself the Gitslava, erupted from the darkness of the void and unleashed their brutal invasion upon the outer worlds of Severus's realm. In mere months, millions were slaughtered, and the Orcs swept through the fringes of its dominion, leaving devastation in their wake. The planetary defense forces of these worlds, once little more than tools of repression for Severus's tyranny and participants in the hollow displays of power to honor their ruler, were woefully unprepared for the reality of war. Few could mount any significant resistance against Grimtooth's relentless hordes.
Here's the thing. Legitimately, come at me. The Imperium is the only way you survive as a human in the 41st millennium. There's no way to do it otherwise. If you do not become part of the Imperium, you just fall apart. You can't do it. No one does it.
Would you think that his plot armor, perhaps, or something?
It could do it? It's not plot armor. because it makes sense that
So this
the
is something we
universe
should
is-
model our life off of.
Yes,
to the
absolutely.
human
We
race
will
now.
put some
Yeah,
guy
okay.
on a throne and suck his soul out for 10,000 years. No,
It's the only way.
it's the only way to
To have a functional government.
Okay, but hear me out. Hear me out. This happens time and time again in book after book, and it makes sense. The things that are after humanity are so powerful and so scary that you need this like massive thing to hold them off, and you need the resources of all planets to be targeting the dangerous areas all the time. You can't have little empires just
Little
sitting.
breakaways.
They can't survive it. There's two. If a hive fleet comes for you and you're just like a couple planets, you got nothing. You need the resources of the Imperium to blunt that. And so it just makes sense that this is the way that works.
I like what you said there of the Imperium targeting places. Like, not every planet has the full might of the Imperium on it, but if you catch the gaze of the Imperium, all of a sudden you have the full might of the Imperium on that planet. So and
they're targeting at a bigger scale, right? Like if you have a couple planets getting hit by Drakari, that might be important to you. And granted, it is, but like from a big interstellar, like humanity surviving perspective, that isn't significant. So the Imperium is core to surviving, and it's the Imperium is the way it is because that's the way to survive in the 41st millennium. Okay.
Well, I just want to say everyone in the chat is chanting greater good. So,
well, we all know where they belong. They're all the filthy Tau players, and we don't even want you in here. Ban.
Yeah, these guys
I'm
are
going
looking
ban
for
heavy
their
here.
anime waifu over there. Fucking nerds.
the anime waifus will save us.
Yeah,
It's the only way.
The thick thighs on what's her name, Shadow
Sun.
is
Anime
is all you'll
waifus
ever
are no
get.
form of government, guys. Only corpse gods are.
Get out of here! Get out of here! Sigismund knows what it's about.
One by one, the world Severus had so painstakingly claimed slipped from his grasp, falling to the orcs' unchecked rampage. Neither Severus nor his sinister Drakari allies could halt the tide of destruction. As his empire crumbled around him, Severus XIII sat brooding on his cold granite throne, watching helplessly as millions of his subjects were butchered. It's funny that this Grimtooth is known as the Git Trader or whatever.
Kit Slayer.
Yeah, Slayer or
Slaver.
Yeah, that's what I meant to say. It's just he's slaughtering everything. Like how many is that his like form of, is he taking the corpses and like playing them as puppets or like?
No, I imagine for every like dead human, he's probably like capturing a bunch more.
Yeah,
Kinda like in the Beast Arises. Yeah. Like that's what they did in the Beast Arises. They like turned people into like cattle essentially. And like, that's thinking ahead. Right? You can't eat all your food in one shot. You gotta, let them breed and produce more for you.
Well, in one of the Dawn of Fire books, I believe it was, there's somebody who was captured on an Imperial vessel, and then the orcs just use them as like manual labor to put their weird ships together too.
There's lots of reasons.
This doesn't make any sense. Why am I screwing this weird piece of metal to this bolt thing?
Why is lefty loosely not that way? I spin it left and it goes right.
Okay. No. Side note. It took me way longer than I am proud to say to learn that in plumbing it's the opposite. Lefty loosey is not correct. It's the opposite in plumbing. Shit. That took me so long to figure out.
Well, I can proudly say that I just learned that today.
Yeah. Dude, I was screaming at a toilet for like 3 hours. Why is this broken? Anyway.
Now, James have you ever considered though that you just bought a faulty part and somebody was like bored at work and made something to troll you?
No, my dad came over and I was like, Dad, I've worked on this for 3 hours.
He just turns it the
other way. He's just like, you just turn it, it's fine. I'm like, what? Why did you turn it that direction? In plumbing, it's reversed. Why? Why is it reversed?
Because it goes the way
that's why you have to go to trade school. That's the only reason.
Australia?
Yeah, exactly.
In Australia, it's the other way.
Yeah.
God damn it. Oh, man. His advisors, this is Severus's, urged him to seek aid from the Imperium, but Severus, blinded by pride and paranoia, silenced them all with the executioner's blow. In the end, with his closest confidants either dead or fled, Severus was left to confront the bitter truth alone. He realized too late that they had been right. Desperate and cornered, he finally sent emissaries to beg the Calexian Lord Sector, Marius Hax, for aid against the Orc invasion. But even in his final desperate act, disaster loomed. Many of the messengers he sent never reached their destination, falling to the blades of unknown assassins or meeting other sinister ends. Only one survived the perilous journey, his own granddaughter. She stood before Sector Lord Haxon Scintilla and delivered her family's plea for salvation. Hack's response was cold and mocking. He watched as Severus's machinations from afar for years, knowing full well the depths of his treachery. Although the full extent of Hack's knowledge remained concealed, rumors persist of a dark connection between the two men, whispered to share a secret, or perhaps even a blood tie that had stayed Hax's hand while Severus built his private empire. Yet now, with the orcs at Severus's doorstep, Hax saw an opportunity. The invasion had humbled Severus, forcing him to crawl back to the Imperium's light. Publicly, Hax agreed, and the orcs' threat needed to be addressed. And the Calexis sector's military reserves were finally mobilized. The capital, well, it's almost crazy. Like, so this guy's been watching me this whole time and kind of just let him do his thing. And once again, it kind of goes back to that targeted thing. Like, you don't want to get targeted by the Imperium, whether you're a fledgling empire or the orcs. They all of a sudden can just draw on a lot of manpower to flood a system. The capital world of the periphery subsector, Kulth, was revealed, but the aid came too late to turn the tide fully. In truth, the Imperium never committed enough forces to decisively end the orc threat. Beyond the periphery, the battlefields descended into total war, and the sector's resources were stretched thin. The Achilles crusade in the distant Jericho Reach demanded vast reserves of men, material, leaving the conflict in the periphery a secondary concern. So even then, yeah, they had resources, but they didn't even have enough to do that. They kind of half did it.
The Jericho Reach, I think that one also comes up a lot in Fantasy Flight games and stuff. I think a lot of their Death Watch stuff takes place there, if I'm not mistaken. So yeah, again, it's like another part of this broader region. And there's a lot of activity happening there too. So that's obviously like funneling. Like you said, the gaze of the Imperium isn't even really here because it's such a small problem. Like one orc warlord, who cares? They got bigger problems. So most of the Imperium's resources are going to that other neighboring battlefield in the Jericho Reach and not going to this region.
Yeah. Among the upper echelons of the Imperium, some whispered that the state of the deadlock was intentional. Those leading the Achilles Crusade needed a closer conflict to mask the immense drain on resources, and the prolonged war in the periphery provided just such a distraction. Whether by design or neglect, the suffering of the periphery was allowed to continue, a convenient stalemate in the shadow of a greater, more secretive war.
Yeah, again, so it's that like politicking, right? Because again, you also have lords governing the Jericho Reach and all that stuff, right? Too, and like it's kind of like this happened both in the USSR and in like in China, where like, okay, you don't want things to look bad on you, so you kind of like lie about what's going on with your area of responsibility.
Don't talk about the Ukraine war again, boys. Don't do it.
This happened a long time ago.
Oh yeah, okay, yeah, nothing like that one.
Yeah, the USSR
and lied numbers. Yeah.
Okay. Anyways, yeah. So like, you don't want to get in trouble if your region is in trouble, right? And you also don't want to admit that like things aren't going well for you. So you would put up like a front to your lord above you and be like, "Oh no, things are great. Like, you know, the war's going on as expected. Casualties are normal." Meanwhile, they're like getting completely obliterated.
Yeah, and then they're kind of pointing their finger over to the periphery subsector, and they're like, "Yeah, we're fine, but go look at what they're doing. They're really kind of not doing. They're losing a lot,
right?" Yeah, so there's this power play between like within the Imperium, and this always comes up too, right? Even as high as the High Lords, everyone's on the same team on paper, but everyone also has their like secret agendas, and like some lords want to screw you and take your place, and all this stuff, right? So that power politicking is always at play whenever any Imperial conflict is happening, and sometimes it's like, yeah, either the Imperium neglects a place completely just because, you know, we're busy with other things, we can't even think about you, or it's intentional, like, oh, we need a distraction, so we'll throw this as a problem in front of other problems and pretend that those other problems don't exist, or malicious, like, oh yeah, I want to screw over this other lord, so I'm going to withhold resources and let him fall, right? So there's all kinds of different like motivations for different lords to be screwing each other.
Basically, every Vox call starts like this from a planetary lord, and it's from Ursats. everything's normal. How are you? And that's from Star Wars. So
Han Solo,
that's
like,
basically how that goes. They're all like, yeah, we're all good here. Go look over there.
you
Like,
just hear
don't-
fighting in the background and glass breaking and screams.
Oh man.
All right. The road to secession. Knowing that the people of the periphery were devout followers of the imperial creed, Duke Severus faced a daunting challenge. Their faith was too strong to be easily swayed towards seceding from the Imperium. He needed a narrative that would compel them to abandon their loyalty and support his ambitions for a breakaway empire. When the Orc invasion struck and the Astra Militarum responded, Severus was forced to accelerate his plans. The slow, methodical corruption of government officials and the gradual manipulation of his people had to be cast aside in favor of swift, decisive action. Severus needed a crisis that would unite the worlds of the soon-to-be Severan Dominate against the Imperium, and it had to be convincing. There would be no more talk of peaceful negotiation. The situation had to appear beyond reconciliation. To this end, Severus orchestrated an elaborate deception. He began to divert vital shipments of food, equipment, and supplies away from the periphery worlds, which were heavily reliant on imports to survive. These worlds were far from self-sufficient, and as their stockpiles dwindled, they entered a state of crisis, particularly during harsh seasons when local production could not meet the demands of their populations. At the same time, Severus increased the military tithes demanded from these worlds, taking their finest young soldiers under the guise of contributing to imperial levies. In reality, these warriors bolstered his private armies, while the loss of their labor further crippled the economies of his planets.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. Like he kind of just keeps kind of taking stuff. Well, not cool, but he kind of keeps taking more stuff for himself. And the Imperium slowly starts to notice another loss here or another supply line broken here. And like he's almost escalating that plan. Like, well, let's kind of really get this thing going here and use it. Everyone's really politicking, not only the High Lords against each other, but now they're kind of getting the Orcs to do some dirty bidding, and it's quite the mess.
Yeah. And then like again, like he's on the one hand, the population can see, okay, the economy is crap. The Imperium for some reason is demanding twice as many levies, pulling people off the work line, which makes you have to do more work. And then, you know, your sons and daughters and family are getting shipped off to who knows where to fight imperial wars. And that's
you're being told they're shipped to one spot, but they're going
like, and Severus is secretly orchestrating this, right? He's building up a private army. He's withholding supplies for himself and claiming it's the Imperium that's forcing them into this like bad situation. So like their ire is slowly building against not Severus, but against the Imperium. Yeah. Meanwhile, Severus is gaining more power. The result was chaos. Famine spread on some worlds. That's chaos with a little c, by the way. Famine spread on some worlds while labor strikes broke out on others due to intolerable working conditions. Desperation mounted and cults began to emerge, preaching heresy against the Imperium and promising salvation to those who would embrace their blasphemous doctrines. Within months, the once thriving worlds of the periphery teetered on the edge of political and social collapse. I just want to mention too that like blasphemy doesn't always have to be chaotic. It could just even be like, what has the Imperium ever done for us? Or, you know,
blasphemy.
Right, exactly.
Heresy.
Like there's that blasphemy has like worshiping other gods component, but also things like atheism or like anti-state religion and stuff can also be blasphemous too. So don't always think in your head that like because something is heretical or blasphemous is necessarily chaotic in nature. Although that certainly does play a role, and that could be the case, right? Like you're desperate, that's the time that you'd call out to like whatever gods are there, you know, help me out in my situation. But also there could just be people like the Imperium's betrayed us, the God Emperor is a lie, right? That's good enough. That atheism or lack of belief would be.
Yeah. When we were doing the Hive City episodes, there's a cool kind of quote where you're only three meals away from a riot, essentially. So yeah, some of these planets are definitely, you know, you can turn a planet real quick if you cut off the supply lane, you know. Could only be one day before they start getting really, really agitated.
I think that's a Soviet quote.
Yeah, I'm sure it is.
Confirmed.
Hey, now, don't you dare. You're the one who lives in commie Canada, you fuck.
Severus watched
Carry
closely.
on.
Severus watched closely, calculating the precise moment when each world would reach its breaking point. His plan was to ensure that the population was sufficiently disillusioned and desperate, ready to act irrationally in their despair. Once revolution seemed imminent, Severus descended upon each world as their savior. He arrived with bountiful supplies and a force of peacekeepers, distributing goods and starving to the starving populace and restoring order just in time to prevent an uprising. But this aid came with a narrative of its own. Severus ensured that all credit for the supplies was attributed to him, presenting himself as a benevolent protector, while casting the High Lords of Terra as the villains responsible for the shortages and heavy tithes. In his public addresses, Severus adopted the role of a reluctant hero. He praised the Imperium's noble cause and the Emperor's divine protection, but subtly planted the seeds of doubt. He spoke of the galaxy's dangers, of the Imperium's endless demands, and of how the people of the periphery were left to suffer under a distant and uncaring government. This initial narrative was only the beginning. In many cases, Severus didn't even need to stir dissent. His manipulation had worked so well that the people themselves began to clamor for secession. Even the most faithful to the imperial creed saw no contradiction in renouncing their loyalty to the Imperium while still honoring the Emperor. So that's the other important thing to keep in mind, is that Severus himself isn't necessarily going like blasphemous against the Emperor, but against the Imperium, the High Lords.
This reminds me of a certain group of people that rebelled over a tea tax.
Oh, never heard of them.
Just like no loyalty to the true emperor,
to the crown.
The king. Yeah.
A bunch of filthy traitors.
Yeah, traitors. You have to stay loyal to the king, otherwise everything falls apart.
Oh, there goes those crazy fucking Canadians again. Jeez Louise. USA. The chat's
USA in the chat. USA. I think we've
I've stirred up a hornet's nest.
Fame's complaints will never be so full.
I'm gonna get like American patriots complaining about me now.
As unrest grew, Severus entertained the idea of secession as a last resort, presenting it as the only viable option for all avenues of diplomacy had failed. When the emergency supplies inevitably began to run out again, Severus called upon the planetary leaders to join him in the formation of a new government. He cleverly framed each world as the first and most important member of his fledgling federation, making them feel as though they were shaping their own future. This is all like really clever, actually, on how, because like I said, like really early on, if you just came out and said like, yeah, we're seceding, but you're not prepared for anything, you're going to get crushed. Yeah. But he took his time. He like did his thing. He manipulated the situation to still be loyal to the Emperor, but not necessarily the High Lords or the Imperium.
Yeah, and like it really doesn't even seem like he cares about the Emperor even himself necessarily. Like it was all just that tool of manipulation, and well, this is what the masses want to hear, and they're used to knowing. And you know, you can't change people from the Emperor's faith, the faith of the Emperor. That would be too much. So
how can I manipulate them to use that against them, essentially?
Yeah.
The illusion of ownership and agency played perfectly into Severus's hands. The people, convinced that they had a stake in his new order, were willing to sacrifice even more than they had under the Imperium, believing that their descendants would someday enjoy greater freedoms.
That also sounds familiar.
I knew if you were going to say it, I was going to say it. I'm not even going to. If you know, you know. As a legitimate imperial ruler of the periphery subsector, Severus had full access to the Imperium's resources, which he used to spread his deceitful propaganda. His network of loyalists ensured that those within the Imperium's bureaucracy followed his directives, or were replaced by those who would. Off-world communications were tightly controlled, and trade was restricted, so that only the messages and goods approved by Severus reached the people. So yeah, he's like really like, this is like kind of going full North Korea now, where he's like locking down the narrative, locking down any kind of like communication in or out. And because it goes both ways, he's got plants on the Imperium side that are like, again, oh no, don't worry about us, everything's going fine. And then on the other side, you know, they're like telling the people, yeah, the Imperium's betrayed you, blah, blah, blah. We're on our own. And I promise you freedom. And I promise you like the potential, like you can forge your own fate under my watchful gaze, right?
Severus sounds a lot like King George, a total douchebag. It's a good
that is absolute treason / heresy.
Blasphemy even.
I'm hitting the ban hammer.
Despite these draconian measures, Severus retained enough of the Imperium's infrastructure to ensure that his message was widely disseminated. His fabricated tale of imperial tyranny and his own just rebellion spread like wildfire. To be fair, the Imperium is pretty tyrannical.
Sure.
To be fair.
But again, go back to that previous conversation. In a universe.
Sure, whatever. I'm just saying, like, he's pretending at freedom while he's still a tyrant. and then blaming the Imperium for being the tyrant, right? Like everyone's a tyrant. Almost like all power should be restricted.
And give it back to the people. Under Christian's rule.
Under my watchful gaze, I will lead you to a new and bright future.
And all your children will be more free than you.
His fabricated tale of
no pumas will be in his kingdom.
Yeah, I will
Christian
annihilate the
will keep you
puma
safe from
threat.
all
That's the
threats.
enemy that we'll unite against, is the puma. I lost my place. His fabricated tale of imperial tyranny and his own just rebellion spread like wildfire, convincing the people of the periphery to rally behind his cause. And so, with carefully crafted lies and ruthless manipulation, Duke Severus XIII cemented his place as the architect of the Severan Dominate.
The chat. Oh no, they got Christian too. Make Chris great again? I beg to differ. Christian was never great to make great again. What about the Cougars? I don't know. They're very different than Pumas. I don't know how far your skills.
They are not
stretch,
different than
Christian.
Pumas,
Maybe.
but what kind of Cougars are we talking? Are we talking about fine lady Cougars, or are we
Alberta.
talking about the animals?
Or Alberta wild Cougars. Christian slays one and gets slayed by the other.
I do have a weakness, which is Cougars.
He gets laid by some and slayed by the others.
Dude, isn't your wife actually quite a bit older than you?
Yes, that's why I'm making these jokes.
Nice. Perfect.
Woo!
Beautiful,
Moving on.
for sure.
All right, only war. While the situation on Kulth had been brought under control, the war beyond the periphery was spiraling out of Duke Severus XIII's grasp. As the orcs pillaged the worlds of Dulge, that sounds like a lovely place.
Deluge.
KW9, that sounds better than Deluge at least, and Pertinax, and a dozen lesser systems, new threats began to arise. The fragile pacts Severus thought he had secured with the Drukhari proved worthless, as the sinister children of the Camorra launched even more brazen raids against the vulnerable worlds on the outskirts of the war zone. Obviously, it was going to happen. Like, I mean, Drukhari are always just going to take advantage.
Expect to get betrayed.
Yes. Even, like, it's in their own culture to betray themselves.
Yeah.
So
It's
No
encouraged.
yes, this is not a bug. This is the feature. The Imperium's collapse in the region drew the gaze of darker forces, the servants of chaos, particularly the warband of Chaos Space Marines led by Sekatoth, the False Whisperer, unleashed a series of vicious assaults, each one steeped in blasphemous purpose. Their violent incursions added a new layer of horror to an already dire situation.
You know, it makes sense that Change would get involved in this with all the scheming and lying and manipulation going on.
Is that the kind of chaos god that these particular renegade Marines
With
were?
a name like Sektoth, the False Whisperer?
I'm guessing
I would
like
100% assume
it
so.
sounds like
Out
it.
of their Necron. Hard to say, but
Yeah.
Well, would they be?
All I know is
Um,
Egypt.
Are they just like a legionary band then, war band, or are they like
I don't even know what you're saying.
are they like a member of the Black Legion? Like, are they a war band of that, or are they like
I have
from
no
a
idea.
specific legion, or are they renegade?
I'll try to find an answer on that.
These are the questions that I can't go to sleep unless I know. Okay,
Don't worry. Google
You didn't even
is
know they
quick.
existed until just now.
and now I need to know everything.
Okay, I'll
These
give you a
things-
little bit. Their
Okay,
shoulder
hit
pad
me.
is definitely the Thousand Suns snake flame eating its own tail. They are a successor of the Thousand Suns. And let's give you a little teaser. The warband of the Sektoth is a large warband or thrall band of the Chaos Space Marines dedicated to the service of change. So yeah, even the word thrall band, definitely these are like, you know,
Well, I
very
mean,
south.
Thousand Suns.
yeah.
Yeah.
I was gonna say change.
Yeah, and like not like even it doesn't sound like they have their bodies. Like I think they preside by the same Thousand Sun rule. But you know, this has a big Wikipedia page actually, so we'll save that for another episode soon.
Nice,
TM,
nice.
but not too soon.
Facing the relentless threats, Severus XIII made a bold and desperate move. He declared his personal annexation of the chaotic space beyond the periphery, claiming it as part of the Severan Dominate. Until the crisis could be resolved, the act of secession enraged Lord Sector Hax, who immediately branded Severus both a traitor and a secessionist, igniting the conflict to unprecedented levels of intensity.
Not only did you betray me, you tried to start your own empire.
What a guy. Now Chaos walks openly on the war-ravaged worlds of the periphery, their dark rituals and unknowable agendas pursued without restraint. The Drakari raid with impunity, their alliance with Severus all but shattered. Meanwhile, the orcs, having entered the second phase of their Wa, shifts their focus from mindless slaughter to the enslavement of entire populations. The orc warlord has established a bastion on Avitohal, enslaving its human inhabitants to fuel his war machine. Countless tons of crude, hastily constructed war materials now flow from the planet's slave-driven forges, feeding the orcs' insatiable appetite for destruction. Yeah, so there's your slavery, Mark.
Yeah. Yeah, and those war machines are also the orcs' bellies, by the way. Feeding those ones too.
There you go. As the lines of battle solidify, the pressure on Severus's forces continues to mount. The situation grows more perilous by the day, but the Imperium's forces remain on the Jericho reach, preventing them from sending their overwhelming number of Astra Militarum regiments needed to crush the Severan Dominate once and for all.
Yeah. Yeah, so again, it's like that same issue with the Tau Empire. Like, they're so small, the Imperium should, in theory, just be able to crush them. But because the Imperium, like, if you take a step back and look at the whole region, you're like, we got bigger problems in the Jericho Reach. You can exist for now while we deal with other issues. So
yeah, and already, like, the thing, too, that I imagine is a calculus. If you were, like, an intelligent Imperial administrator, you'd be like, okay, this is a renegade faction. It's bad, but it's basically operating the same administration that we would have, but just, and it would be doing the same thing we'd want anyway. It's just not officially under our control. And since it's so busy fighting off things we already hate, you can just leave it. It's like, it's a
buffer zone.
Yeah, it's not a negative to you. And if you need to, if it does succeed, you can just go in and take it over and just replace the government, and you just have your whole thing right back. Yeah. It's not a huge challenge to you. So I could see why would the Imperium bother?
Yeah, now that's the Imperium as a whole. I'm pretty sure people like Hax might send Imperial forces there.
Oh, sure.
And you'll have like fights on that level, so you could probably table the Severan Dominate against Imperial forces.
Sure.
But yeah, it's like only the resources available to Hax at the most, right?
Right. Because he's the only one that would care to.
Yeah, like higher than him, they're like, we can't. All our stuff is going to Jericho. Yeah. You're on your own. Figure it out.
Yeah.
Each standard year that Severus's rebellion remains unchecked strengthens the Dominate's core worlds, while the orcs entrench their power. And all the while, the forces of chaos slip through the region like shadows, unchecked and unhindered. Whispers of madness fill the air, with prophets foretelling of imminent arrival of Komos, the tyrant star, a dire omen that has haunted the Calaxis sector for generations. The stars grow darker, and the hour grows late for Severus XIII, as the forces arrayed against him close in from every side.
Mm-hmm. But at this point, he can at least say that he does have his own empire.
Good. That's true. Hey? That's more than me.
He did it. He did it, guys. Success.
He's got more slaves than I do.
What a guy.
Well,
so let's talk about,
to be clear.
In case anyone's listening.
Just in case the FBI decides to do an extranational assassination on me.
The Dominate. The Severan Dominate, as a political entity, exists only in the mind of its figurehead, Duke Severus XIII, and in the hearts of the loyalists who fight to uphold its fragile borders. To the Imperium of Man, it is nothing more than a rebellious collection of worlds ruled by an arrogant successionist whose people have betrayed humanity. Yet, despite the Imperial's refusal to recognize the Dominate, its troops on the ground have adopted the term Dominates for the rebels they fight. This name gives their enemies a clear identity and cause, something against which the soldiers of the Astra Militarum can rally. The core worlds of the Severan Dominate are situated along the Calaxis Scarus warp conduit, with several subsidiary worlds positioned on lesser spurs of the vast route. None of these core worlds have been spared the devastation of war. At various times, they face attacks from Imperial forces or from Grimtooth Gitslaver and his orcs, while other opportunist forces exploit the chaos gripping the region. The Calaxis Scarus warp conduit. One of you boys should read that while I'm reading this, because that sounds like that could be kind of something interesting.
Hey, Christian, can you pull this up?
Yeah.
Thanks. The nature of the warp travel allows for warp to erupt unpredictably anywhere within Severus's territory. Imperial ships can drop out of warp space at any point along the Calaxis Scarus conduit, making coordinate defense against such assaults nearly impossible. While these sporadic attacks disrupt the Dominate, they are often difficult to sustain over time. As a result, such offenses are often carried out by the Imperium's elite forces, veteran Astra Militarum units, stormtroopers, and even the superhuman Astartes. The majority of the Imperial's long-term operations on the Spineward Front focus on worlds closer to the Calexis sector's borders. There are countless thousands of soldiers are fed daily into the grinding maw of the total war. Though beset on all sides by enemies, the Severan Dominate still clings to life, albeit precariously. Its people continue to rally around their despot leader, willing to renounce the rule of the Imperium. Severus and his agents have skillfully driven a wedge between the authority of the High Lords of Terra and the religious devotion to the Emperor of Mankind in the mind of the Dominate's people. They have supplanted the High Lords with Severus XIII while preserving the worship of the God Emperor. In this twisted narrative, Severus' agents preach that the High Lords are the true traitors and the Emperor Severus's agents preach that the High Lords are the true traitors to the Emperor and to humanity, and that Severus is the rightful leader of the Dominate. The Imperium's brutal attempts to suppress this belief are held up against evidence of Severus's claim, proof that resonates deeply with the downtrodden citizens under his rule. Yeah, so, he kind of just is able to build his own shitty little empire. He now is fighting wars on all sides, kind of able to maintain it almost just by there's just too much happening. This war kind of gets fought here, and then now the orcs are here, and now the battleship's in their favor. The Imperium shows up, now it's in their favor, and there's these worlds along the edge that just kind of are constantly being fought over and changing hands, probably back and forth. And do we find anything about that rift? Because that had something interesting with it.
Yeah, so that's what I was going to say.
Ability to just pop up.
It doesn't, I don't have a page for it exclusively, but there's pages on the Scarus sector and the Calexis sector, and they're both pretty prominent regions. So it could be just this is the border region between them, and that makes sense how in a small empire like this could exist, because you got so much going on both sides of it that all the resources are going to that. You got everything from the Ravener and the Ravener books and Eisenhorn books happening in the Scarus sector, as well as the Siege of Vrax, which is huge. And then on the Calexis side, you have a bunch of stuff going on from the other Dark Heresy campaigns and stuff. And I believe this is a lot to read on all of it, which is to say future episode. But
can I just side note on one of my favorite aspects of Eisenhorn, since that's come up a couple times. Yeah. I like that it's world building in similar way to this, where it's not just war all the time. There are planets that he goes to that are just people going about their lives, and there's a ski resort that he's going by, and there's an element of normalcy. And with 40K you can kind of get caught up so much in the wars that are going on and the constant strife everywhere. But I liked that in that book it gave a little bit of tone to the Imperium that I think is missing. That there are large chunks of the Imperium where no one's fighting. Yeah, no one's died. There aren't any wars there. And there aren't any gene stealer cults rising up, and there's not it's just everyone's going about their day. Yeah. It would be in our planet. Most of the world isn't in a war right now. There are lots of places where there's things flaring up everywhere, but in 40K it's the similar thing. Most people are not in war zones. And I think that's just an interesting tonal thing. Even in the Severus Dominate, there's lots of planets his core worlds they're not the war zones that are being fought over. It's these periphery planets that are the unfortunate places that kept fought over all the time. And I think that's just tonally such an interesting thing to keep in mind when you're thinking about 40K in lore wise. Not everywhere is a war zone.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. An alien that would look on our modern day Earth would be man, that planet is in chaos. Meanwhile, we're talking shit about tiny men online. We're perfectly content, far away from war. Yeah, very interesting.
Yeah, cool. Are you satisfied with my research, Mark?
I am very satisfied. Throw that man some Patreon dollars. Or if you're not satisfied with them, throw a Puma at him.
Don't worry, he can take it.
I can take it. At least two. Not at least two.
Two. Get out of here.
All right, let's talk about the false philosophy of the Severan Dominate. After orchestrating a revolution against the so-called tyranny of the Imperium of man, Duke Severus XIII faced a new challenge. convincing his followers that his regime would be fundamentally different from the one they had just overthrown. To this end, he set about drafting a series of documents that granted his citizens the illusion of empowerment. However, despite the outward appearance, they call it a constitution.
Yeah. All rights can be
Don't worry,
revoked.
we'll
if you don't have a
separate the
weapon.
branches of government.
We're gonna get so much flack. For the record,
No,
I
we're
don't
not
even
talking
believe
shit
all
about the
this.
Ukraine, so it's fine. I think they want the collapse of America, so it's fine.
Right. However, despite the outward appearance of reform, Severus had no intention of sharing any real authority. In truth, Duke Severus XIII is far more a megalomaniac than even the most sinister depictions he painted of the High Lords of Terra. Yet, Severus has masterfully crafted a public image that stands in stark contrast to his true nature. The central pillars of his government are built on maintaining this deception. He recruited entire worlds to join the Severan Dominate by presenting himself as a compassionate and caring leader, a stark alternative to the distant and uncaring rulers of Terra. To uphold this myth, Severus portrayed his government as one that promised hope, knowing full well that war against the Imperium and Xenos alike was inevitable. This is really written by British authors. That is what illusion of freedom in the colonies, you rebels. Severus ensured.
Yeah, I can just kind of picture him going to these worlds and like showing him these core worlds that he has, these peaceful places, and be like, look at the enlightenment over here. Meanwhile, like, don't go to the fringe worlds. Like, those are bombarded and destroyed. But yeah, he has these little pockets of paradise that he can kind of offer, where that's really not the case typically.
Yeah, and again, that illusion of freedom, like, things are going to be rough for a while because we're obviously fighting for the freedom that we want. But once we get to the other side of this conflict, things are going to be great. Right. Just like dangling that hope in front of them. Severus ensured that his people believed this war was their only true path to survival. But mere survival was not enough. He promised them a utopian future, a glorious destiny that lay just beyond the horizon. The Duke believed that such a grand vision would make his people more willing to endure short-term sacrifices in the hopes that they would pave the way for a paradise. In pursuit of this vision, Severus made grand promises, economically and politically impossible to fulfill, that the world of the Severan Dominate would be transformed into a bastion of prosperity. He assured his citizens that miraculous archaeotechnology would provide for all their needs, from abundant food to luxurious goods, and that the military service requirements might even be reduced. Of course, all these promises came with a condition. They could only be realized if victory was first achieved. Despite the impossibility of his assurances, Severus has gone to great lengths to make them seem credible. He has tapped into supplies he hoarded long before the revolution, distributing them early on as demonstrations of his sincerity. Yeah, again, like we mentioned, like, how better to get the population to like work twice as hard and give twice as much than to be like, just on the other side of the sacrifice, like, things will be better, we promise, versus like under the imperial boot, you're sacrificing all your time and all your blood for nothing, right?
Yeah, the Imperium's been at war for 10,000 years, and
they've achieved nothing.
That won't change. Yeah,
and again, he's like, things are going to look bad in the near future because he knows that's inevitable. He can't like make the orcs just disappear.
Yeah,
but he can get twice as much out of the people that are under him, under that false promise. Though these initial reserves were substantial, they are far from sufficient to sustain such generosity indefinitely. As agricultural losses from the early battles continue to mount, Severus's stockpiles dwindle by the day. Only a select few of Severus's most trusted associates are aware of the precarious situation. For the average citizen, however, the early signs of prosperity have engendered deep loyalty to the Duke. Many now believe that Severus might truly raise their worlds to new heights, turning the periphery into a beacon of human civilization. In fact, on a few worlds, cults have sprung up among followers of the Imperial Creed who declare Severus to be the prophet of the immortal emperor. To them, only someone touched by divine power could transform such a bleak situation into one filled with unbounded promise. A further complication arises from Severus's promise of unprecedented personal freedoms. Within the Imperium, individual liberties vary significantly from world to world, depending on local governance, Adeptus Arbites oversight, and ecclesiarchy authority. Generally, however, such freedoms are limited and controlled. Severus has suggested that under his rule, all citizens would have the right to determine their own lives. Whether or not he ever intends to deliver on these promises remains to be seen, but the very act of offering them has enticed some to his cause while alarming others.
You get a puma, and you get a puma. Everyone gets a puma. Those are unrealistic economic goals. You can't do that.
You can't run an economy based on puma. Few citizens of the region, unaccustomed to the lack of imperial oversight, understand the dangers these liberties could invite. Such freedom might expose them to heresies that would attract the attention of Xenos, rogue psychers, or even the ruinous powers. While the people's devotion to the emperor might stave off immediate catastrophe, some may eventually advocate for religious freedoms that would weaken the power of the imperial creed to safeguard humanity in the region. Kind of speaking to James's point of like, they are so authoritarian, especially around things about the warp and psychers, is that like, okay, everyone's free to worship whatever chaos gods they want. Then you have chaos infiltration and cults and a whole mess.
Immediately explodes in your face.
Yeah, so like it's kind of like
immediately,
yeah, it's kind of like the counterbalance to like, yeah, these freedoms would be nice, but
Severus Tiger King confirmed. A good chat.
The
Good
comments
chat.
in the chat are so funny, man. Most people don't know war is won on logistics. And then the next one's like, actually, war is won by pumas. And then the next one's like, yeah, logistical pumas are a nightmare. The chat's so funny. Fuck.
Despite all his promises, the Duke has no intention of relinquishing ultimate authority over his worlds. Any decisions about personal freedoms or governance will be made according to his will. Severus is prepared to lie, cheat, and manipulate as necessary to ensure his continued control. Where elections are held, Severus sees to it that they are rigged to favor his loyalists. On worlds where governance is based on hereditary, divine, or military rule, those in power ultimately answer to the Duke. Though he maintains the facade of choice and freedom, none of these promises have been realized, nor are they likely ever to be.
Yeah. Man, that just hits deep.
It's cool because it's like a grimdark version of like democracy and stuff, right? Like, obviously being a Western country, we're a little bit biased towards things like democracy, but everything has to be grimdark in 40K. So you can't have like a truly patriotic, freedom-loving faction without it actually being like a total lie and deception.
Yeah.
Well, I think this is where 40K lore excels, is the idea of it's a way of looking at things pessimistically. That's the main theme of everything in 40K at its root. It's take something and how can you like take it to its most extreme and then put it under stress, basically. And that's what a lot of the lore does. It's like, okay, we're gonna put like the ideal of people wanting freedom and put it to under huge stress, and we're gonna take somebody's personal ambitions and greed and bitterness, and we'll put that to an extreme. And like that's the way 40K lore always becomes interesting, is like where you look at, okay, you've heard a story of like a corrupt government, well now I'm gonna crank that up. And then you've heard a story of like a nightmarish horde coming to your civilization. We got the orcs, and now they're coming. Like it always turns it up to another level, and that's why there's always something interesting about every story they put out on a grander narrative level.
It's so familiar, but like you said, it's just amped up that it's almost unfamiliar at that point.
Mm-hmm. Cool. Let's talk about their initial assets. For centuries, the Severus family has experienced a gradual erosion of their holdings across the Calaxis sector. Duke Severus I once commanded a vast number of worlds, leveraging them throughout his lifetime to secure a position of influence that seemed poised to shape the sector's future. However, alongside their wealth, the Severus line also inherited a legacy of bitterness and a thirst for revenge. As a result, many of his descendants squandered their assets in a relentless pursuit of clearing their founder's name, becoming more focused on old grievances than on sustaining their fortune. By the time Duke Severus XIII assumed his title, the family's influence had dwindled to little more than a dilapidated palace on a world ruled by another sovereign, an undeniably weak position from which to launch any kind of rebellion. Despite these humble beginnings, Severus XIII had begun strategizing long before inheriting his title. Early on, he took stock of his limited resources and cultivated a network of contacts. Ambitious from a young age, the Duke harbored grandiose dreams and pursued them with relentless determination. He was always prepared to take shortcuts when necessary, but his goals never wavered. Yeah, he's like the idea of like, I mean, it's still like an impressive comeback story to come from like basically you have nothing of real power to like you're actually ruling your own realm here.
Yeah.
the thing is, it's all built on lies, so it's like an almost inevitable self-destructive story as well. It's like it's almost like a Breaking Bad element too, like starting off with in this humble beginning and slowly being corrupted by the thirst for power. I don't know. It's a common narrative, but it's an interesting one.
Yeah. No, I love that narrative too. And yeah, like 40K always likes to leave this story in that like space of like everything's teetering on the edge, right? Like that's where it used to be with the Black Crusade, and that's where this empire were kind of left the story of this is a situation, this is a setup, this section, this like subsection exists, the subsector, but it's also teetering. Like any minute, like something could tip the scales, and the whole thing could come apart, right? Yeah. So it's just left in that state of tension, and then you can go and play in it however you want, either an RPG or in this case it's RPGs, but you could do tabletop stuff, which I would get into at the end of that. Yeah,
cool. His noble title afforded him a modest degree of influence in the periphery subsector, which he skillfully parlayed into connections with individuals who held greater power and resources but lacked the prestige of imperial nobility. Through a complex web of alliances, Severus XIII was able to secure a variety of valuable assets, ranging from political favors to military support. These relationships would prove critical in his rise to power. Severus's ascension to leadership of the periphery subsector was no mere coincidence. He had deliberately set his sights on this region, drawn by its historical connection to his ancestors' ambitions. The periphery's location on the frontier of imperial space also provided a degree of autonomy that would have been impossible in the heart of the Calaxis sector. This relative isolation offered opportunities for growth, if he could secure them. One of the most significant advantages of the periphery was its access to the warp conduit linking the Calaxis and Sakaris sectors. This trade route was a valuable asset that Severus knew he could exploit. By levying tariffs on traffic passing through the region, or through bribes and seizure of contraband, he could steadily build his wealth.
Tariffs work?
Getting political. I want a 20% tariff on all speeders coming out of
the warp.
Frankly, I think we're getting ripped off by the other countries. We need more tariffs.
The other sectors.
The Calaxis sector is ripping us off.
Calaxis.
All right. Anyway, let me jump in here. In a more desperate scenario, the trade route could even provide opportunities for piracy. And if his position ever became untenable, the conduit offered him an escape route into the Sakaris sector. Through careful planning, manipulation, and relentless drive for power, Duke Severus XIII transformed his meager inheritance into a launch pad for his ambitions, laying the groundwork for what would become the Severan Dominate.
Yeah, cool. And that is where we're going to leave them for now. We still got some more in this episode, so don't worry. There is a lot more about them. And in the next episode with James and Chris here, we're going to be talking about how they actually do some diplomacy. We'll be able to dive like into the actual political intrigue and what they're offering everyone. We're going to do some succession stuff. What happens to a world when their leader dies and all that kind of cool stuff. Relocation. And finally, how do they actually hold the front? Like, what do their troops look like? What kind of war gear are they using? All that kind of stuff in the next episode. But we leave it there for now. There's so much cool stuff on them. I just can't get over the Fantasy Flight books. And I wish there was more content like that out there where you really just dive into it. And it's so many parallels to what's happening or just what has happened. They really lean into all the things that make 40K great.
When was that book written? Do you know Mark?
I could Google it, but I would probably say like 2010.
Yeah, I would.
Okay,
I'm guessing
it's not that old. Like
sir.
I mean,
I'm sorry to tell you that was 14 years ago.
It was a while ago,
Yeah.
but I mean, it wasn't like 2001 or something.
Sure.
Interesting.
Yeah, I could find it. Still looking, but I
Fifth
can't look
edition
and talk.
says Ursats.
Fifth. Well, maybe I'll find that later. But yeah, it's probably around that era. I would imagine 2010-ish.
Sounds good. Cool.
Yeah.
So I got some closing thoughts and conversation, thought-provoking questions, all that to kind of round us out here. The first one that I got here is, can the Severan Dominate's independence last, or is it inevitably doomed by its isolation from the Imperium's resources? Are they on that fine line, like that fine line where they're not being noticed by enough to get wiped out, but they have enough resources to kind of fight back and hold their own? What does that balance of power look like? What would shift them?
I think that, again, like where 40K likes to put things is on the edge, on that teetering balance. It could go one way or the other. Like they can hang on it's never going to last forever, right? At some point, this whole operation is going to come crashing down, be it from too much external pressure, being the orcs, the Eldar raids, or from internal pressure in the Imperium. Finally, is like, okay, we dealt with Jericho. Let's turn our attention to this like petty warlord who's gone rogue. And even the fact that like resources for him are dwindling in the background, maybe it just implodes on its own, right? They just can't keep up with the status quo, and eventually they just collapse, right?
Yeah.
I mean, like so much of this is also built on his own personality, right?
Yeah.
And how much of that would be if he dies, or like if maybe he's already dead for all we know. And he's
It's
just
just
like,
propaganda.
Yeah.
That's keeping
But like it's so much is built on his
cult of personality.
exactly,
Yeah.
and his manipulation of everyone. I don't see that how this would survive too long after
he's dead.
Yeah.
I mean, it could also end up like a North Korea situation. Like on the global stage, like North Korea is pretty backwater. No one cares. Like if the entirety of the world put all their pressure on North Korea, I'm sure they could completely obliterate it. But they don't. Part of it is nuclear weapons, but also like we're on the third generation of
That's true.
tyranny, right? So if he grooms a successor and like, you know, does all the same manipulation, like this is the new god, when I die he's going to take over, like or maybe not the new god, but the new prophet of the emperor, right?
Yeah.
And
I wonder if he would even care to do that, like, or if he's so like selfish and like kind of
it ends with me,
it ends with him type thing, like he's willing to do everything he can until he's dead, and then
who cares?
Fuck whatever happens at that point.
Yeah. Like, I mean, it's gonna fall apart inevitably.
Yeah.
Eventually, the Imperium's gonna just send in a crusade and just go through that sector by happenstance and just rip it apart.
Purge Seraph says it best: all civilizations collapse just a matter of time. Hey, maybe now's a good time to throw out to the that's eternal. We'll throw out to the group chat. If you want to come join us on some of these questions, there's an invite link in the stream now, and you can kind of get your opinion on what we're talking about. So invite link is now in there, and we'll kind of maybe go to the next question unless you guys have anything else on that one.
No, jump on it.
Right.
Jump on it.
Is Severus genuinely devoted to his people well-being, or is he simply a skilled manipulator? That kind of almost goes to that. Will he try to make a successor? Does he even care what happens when he's gone?
I think you care because he cares about, they all seem to care about legacy a lot and their like prestige, but does he care about his own people's well-being? No. He keeps tricking them into He's lying to them and wrecking their lives. I don't think that's a
sign of a good leader. I don't like being lied to. Holy smokes. All our politicians lie to us.
That feels bad. We got James, who's just entered the stage. What do you think about that?
Oh, hey, how's it going?
Hello.
Good.
I'm sorry. What do you think about what?
What would
He's
the
even
next
listening
question?
to the show.
He's like, how did I get here? Pocket dial. The next question: could the Severan Dominate represent a viable alternate model of leadership in the 41st millennium, however flawed? And what would that form of leadership kind of be classified as?
To put it lightly, probably a dictatorship.
With a slight sprinkling
on the
of
theme of
cult of personality.
Yeah, it's a theocracy.
Yeah, a democratic theocracy.
Where like the Imperium is definitely more like religious, like, you know, it's also a dictatorship, but there is that very strong religious nature that ties it all together.
Yeah, but I don't remember. Like, was the Severan Dominance like really like still like being held together by religion, or like did it kind of give up on the God Emperor?
As far as we know, they still venerate the Emperor as a god, and again, like
because he's a prophet.
Yeah, Severus has tied himself to that mythos. It's going to be kind of hard to be like, oh, I was actually a prophet of a false god. You could, but it wouldn't make sense. But now he's already staked his claim on the godhood of the Emperor and him as its prophet, right? So they are still, I would say, pretty religious. Although I wonder if he sets up his own church. like the Anglican Church or something. Just a spin-off.
Well, it definitely
Yeah,
would
like
be.
I would imagine that would be kind of the next goal. Like like I don't think this man himself, Severan, is a religious man. Like I don't think he believes in the emperor. He's just using that. So eventually I'd imagine if he's in power long enough, he'd slowly switch it. And maybe when he sets up that next generation, his son or whatever, that's when he switches it to the religion of that guy, you know? Because he clearly has like far sight. Like he's planning out the future. He's, you know, capable of that 4D chess or whatever that saying is.
Yeah. God Emperor 2.0.
Yeah, declare himself as like, I'm the emperor's son.
Yeah, well, he could even just like, or the emperor has died on the throne and now he has been free to manifest himself in my son's body, you know, pulling the whole farmer's wife situation, but less backwater degenerate and more political ambition.
It's just kind of like shines like a flashlight on him or something. Like, look, he's glowing with the God Emperor's radiance or something.
Yeah, if you can found the Sisters of Battle by using a fucking force field to trick a bunch of bitches to join in, yeah, you can do a flashlight maneuver as well. Same technology, essentially. Light shenanigans. We'll get to the next question here. I see there's a couple people in the chat, so we'll get James on this next question. You know, other people I see are joining. So here's the question. Are the promises of freedom and autonomy in the Severan Dominate real or just another form of control? I think we kind of actually touched on that one, so maybe we'll jump past it unless anyone has anything important kind of.
Dad, no.
Yeah,
jump.
So the next one would be, would the Imperium be wise to reevaluate how it handles rebellious territories like the Severan Dominate? Like, should they have interfered sooner to let it get it out of control like this, or what should their kind of approach be?
To be real with you, the Imperium like spans over like 1 million worlds, right? Like, no way are you evaluating that much worlds and like getting all like info back in time to like be like, oh, we need to get more food to this area. Oh, we need to really like increase the pay of these planets.
Yeah.
And then again, it's like the Imperium. So like,
yeah. And like depending too on what the rebellious nature is too. Like there wasn't a lot of chaos influence in this. So, you know, what you do with a world that you can tell is starting to have some small cults form up, that's a very different situation than, you know, I guess they still worship the emperor. I guess they're still killing orcs. Like,
just let him be.
Let him be.
I don't think that's the way the Imperium would react to this if they knew about it. Because like implicit in what we had gone through today was the idea that the Imperium didn't know, wider Imperium didn't know, because that Hacks guy was holding up the information that would have been necessary to allow this to be unveiled sooner. So if the Imperium knew about it, they would have crushed them. It's just they don't really know about it yet, and it's kind of been held up in a couple ways anyway. So I assume they'll go in and purge the whole place when they get a chance.
Yeah. And also on that note, kind of like I don't know much of Severan Dominate Slayer, so I don't know what's next, but like the way I could possibly see is like the Imperium is not known for being like gentle or subtle. Like they maybe like they even like had this like they told Severan like, oh yeah, cause like a rebellion on this place so we can use it as an example, right? So it's like, oh, all these worlds have been getting like a little too reckless. So like, oh, Severan, start this rebellion, and then like when they like the rebellion's in like full force, they like send in 1,000 space marines and they're like they murder everyone, and they're like, see, this is what happens when you don't like follow us. This is what happens when you try to like rebel.
Yeah.
No,
yeah,
they don't
maybe
need...
go for it, James.
Oh, I was going to say they don't need people to do that for examples. That happens on its own, and they do that for fun anyway. So they don't need people to sign up for it on purpose.
Yeah, but maybe something like a little bigger. Probably not. Like this lore is already written, and I don't know much about the Severan Dominance. It's just too small, like the Tower Empire.
Cool. Well, thanks for joining us on the show. We'll kick you and add the next guest, Grimaldus. Welcome. Our question for you, if you want to answer and partake, is how do we define success or failure in the rebellion when it comes to survival versus actual change? How much of how far away from the Imperium were they really able to get? How different was it really than the Imperium would treat their worlds?
No, no sounds coming through, bud.
How about now?
Oh, you're good now.
Beautiful. I think it really just depends on how much meat you send into the grinder.
Nice.
So no change, just a question of degrees.
That's all I really see it is. I'm a tabletop guy. I know nothing about this individual, but I see no difference between him and how the Reclusiarch and how the Imperium deals with this same situation. It's just a matter of power and who wants to take it.
Yeah, they're all still eating corpse starch at the end of the day. It's just what flavor you're eating, beef or chicken.
If that at all.
If
Not
that.
unflavored corpse starch.
Well, I mean, we did talk about how he did manipulate extra tithes specifically to slander the Imperium, and they did. He is amassing resources and hoarding them. So, I'm sure there's lots of governors in the Imperium that are doing that as well, and that's what it is. But an idealized version of the Imperium, the way it's supposed to work theoretically, he is doing worse than what he's supposed to.
Yeah.
Well, you control the food supply, you control the population, kind of makes a whole lot of sense.
Yeah. And success and failure could be, you could talk about it twofold on the individual level of how is actual Severus, faring, as opposed to how's the population under him faring. I'm sure that there was a huge drastic change in his lifestyle, but everyone else might kind of be in that same boat, while he is now, he's got his gold-plated toilet and all these kind of cool things and whatever else he's got going on for his own personal self. So in that regard, it could be a success, and who cares? Like he said, when he dies, it doesn't sound like he's a religious figure or a believer, so fuck it. Who cares when I'm gone?
Well, I don't even think it's a matter of he thinks he cares who's gone. You said it yourself. He's thinking in a 4D chess match. So he's thinking about his successors coming through. So it's not a matter of him as an individual, but it's a matter of his lineage.
Yeah.
They do seem to
in
care
the
about
next
their
episode,
family.
we will talk more about succession and stuff. So yeah, I think that's a valid point that we haven't been able to really open up and discuss, but I think you hit it on the head there. I think he does want to kind of even the whole initial cause. It's he's disgruntled with what happened with his family name and stuff. He clearly cares about legacy, and he even rides on the coattails of that kind of to some degree,
Yeah, I can definitely see that. I mean, he's basically just taking a fundamentalism of a world that he's already living in and taking that to his own advantage. Actually, as very similar how you had said last episode, you said it's a lot easier to work with the devil than the one you don't.
Sure. Yeah. Any other thoughts on this one or next question?
Hit the next one,
Okay.
man.
Negative, sir.
Would the people of the Dominant ever be willing to return to the Imperium, and under what question or conditions? I mean, what would
I think a better
change for
question
them
is,
to want to actually,
would the Imperium even want them back? Because it's such a small sector. The Imperium doesn't need you. They don't care. You're just as good to them dead as anything else.
That's completely irrelevant, Christian. They're humans and they belong in the Imperium, and we're going to force them to come back whether they like it or not. That's the way they come back.
benefit. Yeah. No, I think they're taken back for sure without any thought, whether through force or just through.
They'll take the planets back.
They-
They'll just exterminate the populations and then reseed it with oil projects.
Virus bomb.
Oh, there we
Right,
go.
exactly.
Now
That's
it's
what I'm saying. The people don't matter.
No, legitimately, I think the Imperial approach to this would just be any planet you bring under compliance. They'd be like, oh, there's people here. You either accept the way that we're doing this the Imperium way, or we'll just kill you.
Yeah.
That's the way the Imperium works.
There's also been this kind of story retold even with when we did what was that last faction we did?
Vestrian.
Yeah, the Volstroyans, right? They didn't openly rebel, but they withheld tithes in their whole punishment, right? So it could be we're not just going to kill you all, but we're going to turn you into an Imperial Guard legion of on an eternal crusade, a suicidal mission that will essentially do the job of exterminating you, but at least we get some more utility out of you before we waste bullets on you. But
yeah, Purge Seraph says people are fickle. Just promise something better in their status quo and they're flock to your cause. Just a matter of how the Imperium deals with it. And that's kind of it for sure. Like, Severus promised them something better. So if the Imperium promises and pseudo delivers on something better, these people have already proven to be traitors and able to manipulate and flip flop. So yeah, I don't think they're truly committed to this little mini empire. If anything, since the first Severus came, this whole place has been on decline, and yeah, they might have this little blip of hope here, but it's going to end quickly. I think they'd go right back to the Imperium without too much thought.
I don't know. I think also depends on how effective the propaganda campaign is, right? Like that is how you engender loyalty, is like if they truly believe that Severus is like the second coming of the Emperor, or the prophet of the Emperor, right? Like how deep does that go? Are they actually willing to get fanatical, or like, no, we were promised freedom, so that's worth it at any cost, even to our own like extermination.
But would it happen within this first generation? Like, I'm really feeding into this thought of, he's thinking foresight wise, beyond himself and his kin beyond him. Like, he seems like a smart individual. I had even mentioned or even thought the fact of him possibly being a psyker, or at least in tune with the warp, so he could kind of have some thought of foresight. I know that's a stretch, but I mean, he seems like a smart individual, and having no lore background on this individual entirely.
Yeah. My only thought about it would be like that propaganda would have to escalate. He would have to take to the next level, I think, of turning them into God. Because currently, as it stands, like they're just like a disgruntled people that still worship the Emperor, So I think you'd have to really, in order for them to not want to go back to the Imperium, you'd have to really change that. They're not going back to the God Emperor, like still a part of that. They have to become this completely new thing, shift that religion away from the God Emperor and to the family legacy in the line.
Yeah.
We'll jump to the next question, judging by the quietness. Okay. I'm just finding it, stalling for time. Would the people... I read that. What
would the army look like on the tabletop?
Oh.
I'm thinking just basically Imperial Guard with the concept of like a penal legion. Just civilians that don't know how to operate weapons, and it's just a matter of, here's your freedom, but it's a fork in the road, and both go to each one of your freedom.
It's kind of like I don't, like, this is just what's coming to mind, but like a well-regulated militia of some sort.
Yeah, you pick up this rifle, and when he dies, you get his ammo and pick up the rifle and follow.
Gotcha.
I like
when you
that.
look at like pictures of these guys, they're pretty well armed and equipped. It looks like they don't look ragtag at the very least.
So you get,
and maybe they don't have the best war gear, but
after he dies.
Lehman Russ is fine though. The crew's all dead.
Absolutely.
Yeah. No, I do like your idea, Grimaldus, of like having a ragtag group. I don't think like we have art and stuff that takes it in a totally different direction, but I do like that thought of like, I think early on, if you had like a militia group that was a lot more ragtag of just like civilians picking up weapons and whatever they can to overthrow their masters. But I think because of the way the Severan Dominate developed over time, he was able to actually take real Imperial resources and funnel them into his private army, which is why they actually look pretty elite. They look like they're wearing almost like Casterkin like armor that's very like decorative. It's very it's almost like hoplite-ish. It's kind of what comes to mind when I look at it.
Is there a percentage basis of how much had actually separated with him? Or is it just kind of, some had seceded and followed Duke? Do we know any numbers? Because it could just be like this front militia, because as the Germans were in the war, they were known as a mechanized army. But then when the Americans and the Allies had showed up, it's, well, we're bringing everyone by horse and carriage.
I think we will learn more about the numbers in the next episode when we're talking about how they're actually holding the front. So that's a good kind of thought, but we're saving it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. How do you feel like these guys would actually play on tabletop? Like, nowadays we could 3D print the exact picture of them to the tabletop and have those minis. But like, do you think they, there's lots of espionage maybe perhaps, or like lots of manipulation? Obviously you could do some tabletop armies where they're allied with Dark Eldar, which would be pretty cool to have the Imperial Guard and Dark Eldar kind of, what would kind of their flavor be,
As you're saying that, like, oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say, I picture their play style would be similar to maybe the Gene Stealers a little bit. Like they're hiding people, they're popping up,
coming up from exactly, just popping up from the ground. I don't know how 10th edition works so well, but like have a deep strike in, minimal scatter zone. I don't know. Like I can definitely see it being a pretty, almost like a Sly Marbo kind of style. Like maybe not every model having the same concept behind it, because that's obviously a little overpowered. But it's I can definitely see lots of models on the table, and just a lot of fun for anyone, win or lose, really.
Yeah.
Nice.
I guess the final question we have here is, what insights into human nature can we glean from the Severan Dominate's struggle for identity and autonomy?
I'm pretty sure you guys got in trouble for this last kind of comment, so
Quick,
can
mute
I
him.
just can we
You can
Next.
pretend to be Trevor Buzak. That's
Line?
why he's here.
line?
Line.
You really put me on the spot. I'm
Well,
going to pass.
Yeah, okay. I think it comes to humans are very easy to
Manipulate.
make feel discontentness. Like they're very easy to be like, this is no longer good. Like if you have somebody who's eating 3 square meals a day and all of a sudden you take them down to 2, that really affects humans and really starts to piss them off. And the saying, the grass is always greener on the other side. I think this is the other kind of lesson. Like people are going to promise you all types of things. And are they really going to deliver? Is it always greener on the other side, or is that just humans being hopeful and maybe naive,
Well, that's a double-edged sword. Hope is the human's greatest weakness and strength.
Yeah, you can be in a pretty desperate situation and still fight on when you should have given up. And sometimes it pays off.
That's just it. I mean, it's a weird concept to think about, that you can put so much thought and effort into one, whether it be a divine creation such as Big E or whatever chaos god you follow. But that's just it. Like hope is a weird thing.
And then on the flip side of hope, Purge Seraph says, people would rather live or believe a lie than to accept the harsh realities of the truth. And that's another lesson too. Like, people just don't want to really acknowledge what's going on, or kind of just they'll play for themselves, or just believe in whatever they have to get through the day.
Is there?
Cool. Well, I think that's all we had for the questions. Are there any closing thoughts before you leave us, Grimaldus?
Well, thank you very much for having me on, guys. Biggest thing is to anyone who hasn't been listening already, pay your tithes.
Yeah, pay your tithes. You got to pay your tithes.
Mark is trying to carve out.
Don't, you'll get eaten by us. There we go.
Mark's trying to carve out his own
So
Severan Dominate.
I've only been listening for about 2-3 months, and honestly, you guys deserve every penny I send you. And anyone else who hasn't been, contributing to this, even like 2-3 episodes, it's worth $1. So,
oh man, yeah, we
get on
appreciate all your guys' support. Seriously, it's overwhelming when you look at numbers, and then it's also overwhelming when you get a little paycheck in your pocket. You're like, people pay for this shit? What the hell?
People
really
pay for
makes
a
you
lot
question
dumber
humanity.
shit.
Yeah, cool. Well, thank you so much, Grimaldus. See you on the next one.
Thanks for having me on, guys.
All right. Well, that's the episode. We got a couple complaints that we'll get to, of course. You can look forward to the next episode with Christian and James next Friday night, and we'll kind of go more into the Severan Dominate and, like I said, their diplomacy tactics, how they do their succession, the relocation, and how they actually hold the front. But till then, we'll do some shout outs. Hey, if you like hearing me talk and try to read, go listen to Lorehammer, listen to Lore. A lot of fun. Hey, I think Gerald and Nick are wanting to do some more. And I've also been wanting to open that up to the public. Like, if you just send me your audio of the story, I can just upload that. That way we can get more content out and just more stories out there. I'm staring at an inbox with 1,000 listener lores in it, and it's just like, holy fuck. So
yeah. And you can also give it the weight your story deserves if you read it yourself in dramatic tone. Fumble it around.
Fucking hell,
his dirty mouth.
Keep my lore
out of your mouth.
God damn.
Yeah, if you like
check
me,
out
and
Christian and Jordan.
Yeah, if you miss Jordan's sultry voice, definitely come check out our Star Wars podcast. If you like Star Wars, we definitely talk about mostly Star Wars Legends stuff, but we do take shots at Disney as well. But yeah, come check us out. Even listen to one episode, see if you like it. If you hate it, too bad. Listen to another one.
You're a part of the Lorehammer team now, and you take it. Yeah. You take
what you get.
And if you do hate what you get,
well, let me cut you off there. Here's the problem with James' complaints. You're reading them, and then I feel like they're directed at me. When they're directed at you, James, these complaints are for you. So we got 2 today, and I'll read the first one because this is directed at you, not me. Get bent, losers. It's a great podcast that the podcast is back and all, but at what cost? Chicken Selects and McDonald's are still like $9 for 5 of them bitches. And I want to know what you honking motherfuckers are going on about. I pay you good money that I earned through exploiting my own blood, sweat, and tears and various other fluids. So I feel that the exchange of services is entirely one-sided in your favor, and I am fucking sick of it. Chicken Selects aren't even that good. The chicken is coating ratio is about 65-35% in the wrong direction, while McNuggets are $6 for 20 of them shits. Make it make sense. Fuck you. Don't even think of saying, why don't you just get the nuggets then? Because fuck you, that's why. What if I'm in a polite company and having dinner with important people? If Chicken Selects don't serve a purpose, then they wouldn't be on the bloody menu. Jesus. Work harder, be better, get work, get jacked, get fucked. Eternally with wet love, Rambo. So James, that is directed at you. What are you going to do about the Chicken Select? Yeah, what are you going to do about the Chicken Select situation?
First of all, I don't appreciate being called a honky. Second of all, those were in pounds. What do you want me to do? I don't live in the UK.
Surprisingly, James has no influence on the UK government.
I keep telling them what to do, and they don't listen to me.
They don't answer his emails.
I keep sending Keir Starmer money, and he just buys more suits with it. So what am I supposed to do? Okay. Man. I have one other one. This is an excellent complaint, and it's wonderful and it's beautiful. I'm about to play it. Hopefully the audio doesn't blow your ears out, but let's give her a go. Well, that was beautiful. I loved it.
Failmouth box cracker here. Just finished your latest episode, Destroying Thirst Horse. And I gotta say, what the shock was that? You keep talking about all this history and strategy, but where's the good? Oh, crumbling! Where's the stomping? I want stories of us orcs tearing things apart. Not some boring chat about newbies having a tea party, squealing over who has the fanciest armor. I mean, come on! I could find better lore from scraping screen guts off me boots. So next time, think of the orc perspective. Less chatting, more chopping, or I'll send me lads to motivate you.
Oh man. Well, so that was that complaint.
Did you pick that up on like some transmission?
Okay, so I just want to say I listened to that the first time. It got sent to me over Discord, and it was hilarious. It's awesome. My wife overheard me listening to it. She's like, "What the hell are these nerds doing with their time? Why do you have time to do this?" And I said, "I don't know.
High
But
effort, low quality. For sure.
That's the key demo for every joke.
And
My
he's going to
favorite
be
kind of
even
joke.
more pissed off too. Like, we had the perfect opportunity to talk about some orc perspective and like war and conflict in this episode with orcs, and we just kind of like, oh, they eat human, and then we move past it.
Think about the orc perspective.
Hey, and this is the other thing I was thinking about listener lore after I heard this. Like, some people are going to put in way more effort than I'm. Well, some people, let's just be honest, are more talented than I am. Not only can they read, they can also add sound effects and do voices. So if you want to start submitting audio stuff, we'll seriously upload it onto listener lore or do whatever we can, however it kind of fits into the show. That was fucking fantastic.
It was pretty great.
Hurtful, but fantastic. Well, that's the end. We've gotten to our list of Patreon supporters. We'll read this off and then we'll do a slow, soft good night from us all. Thank you, Rico, Booger Coltrane, Brugger Coltrane, Paul, Martin, Rambo, Chado, Eduardo, and Toasty the Heavenly Demon.
One of those names isn't real.
Yo, do we know who Eduardo who wrote that complaint in? Do you know? The chat's wondering.
I do. Just give me a sec here. I have to get.
Give
I don't
credit.
know. Here's the thing. I never know if when people send complaints in, I never know, like, do you actually want me to say your real name?
Just drop the first name, I think.
Jerem.
That's what I always. Jerem.
Oh,
I think that was probably the guy who made our 3D intro.
Oh yeah,
I'm pretty sure. Yeah.
Talent for days.
We'll give him a high five in the Discord, anyways. Everyone that's listening.
Yeah, for sure. Very cool. Well, that's that episode. The next official episode will be with Nick and Gerald, and we will be talking gangs and criminal organizations. So we'll see you then. James and Christian, thanks for joining.
Always
Sounds
a pleasure.
good. See you guys around.
Adios.